What's the question that Jesus is answering when he shares three parables? Again, back in Matthew 24, verse 45. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? So we've seen one parable. Now we're going to see another short case study. And this is set up with a man who owns a lot of property, and he entrusts it to various servants, and he's going to go on a journey. And he calls upon them to have an increase. So he gives them a certain set of resources. When he returns, he expects those resources to have been multiplied or magnified or increased.
So in verse 14 it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods." So again, it's a parable. It's symbolic. You can find all kinds of applications and likenings of this parable on multiple levels and layers. But if you look at it from the Savior's perspective, he's on the earth with his apostles. He then goes to a far country. It's as if he's leaving earth and going to heaven with the promise, I'm going to come again. And when I come again, I want to see an increase in what I have given you. And remember, these are all servants.
Not enemies.
These aren't enemies. They're not outsiders. These are insiders. They're in his household. They're in a covenant agreement with him.
And they know him, which will come out later in the parable. They know exactly the kind of character that their master is.
But one of them doesn't really know him, as we're going to find. Two of them really do.
Yeah.
And the other's an outlier. Foolish and wise. We're going to see this contrast. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1. Now, right out of the gate, this starting part of the parable, it would be easy for us in our world today to look at that and say, Jesus, this story, it's not fair. Because you see, we live in a world that seems to want to demand equality and sameness. And so we would say, well, man, you've disadvantaged this guy and this guy compared to that guy. Of course he's going to succeed. Of course he's going to be benefited. But these two, wow, I mean, we're not even half of what you gave them. It's not fair. That's a phrase you'll hear a lot in our world. It's not fair. I love the fact that Isaiah 55 says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Because he says, my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I see things from a different perspective than you looking horizontally. So yes, from an earthly perspective, there's no question that doesn't look fair. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look equal because it's not the same. But look at the rationale Jesus gives in the second half of verse 15. To every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Based on Jesus' statement, would it have been merciful? Would it have been gracious and kind for him to give to this guy or this guy 5 talents or 4 talents? Jesus is the one telling the story, and he's the one giving the rationale for the different amounts. And he's saying, according to their individual capacities, it doesn't seem like it would be very merciful or kind to give this man 4 talents or 3 talents, because you might be setting him up for failure. And you look at another principle of the gospel from Doctrine and Covenants, section 82, verse 3, where much is given, much is required. And he who sins against the greater light shall receive the greater condemnation. It's fascinating to me that, yes, he's giving more talents to this guy than to the others, but that means more is required of him, according to his individual capacity. So remember, keep coming back to this context. We're trying to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. And many of you watching this, the Lord has given much into our hands, given us great opportunities, many talents, not just gifts and abilities kinds of talents. This is a placeholder. Talents is a weight and measure for money And so that's a symbol that then can represent all kinds of things. And the idea being, don't get complacent and say, well, at least I'm doing a lot better than all of those people out there, so I can just kind of coast. No, we have to figure out what God has given us and magnify and multiply those things, because God doesn't grade you on the curve. He won't bring you to the judgment bar and put a whole bunch of people next to you and see how you measure up with those people, be they faithful or wise. He's going to judge you based on what you received. And I love in this parable how the three men are judged independent of each other. He doesn't bring them in as a group and say, but you didn't do as well as he did. He doesn't do that. And that's comforting to me moving forward.
Yes, let's read the next couple of verses. Then he that received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made them another 5 talents. And likewise he that received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Now, some interesting thoughts here. So these 2 actually go out and take a risk. What they're doing is risky. It's possible that as they trade, things don't work out and they lose the money. Now, in this parable, in this case study, they didn't. They actually increased. This guy didn't take a risk. What did he do? He actually preserved the wealth that was received. He took no risks. He simply made sure that the value of what he received was not eroded at all. Kind of interesting.
It is interesting because if you look at what seems to be the motivator here versus the motivator here. Why did he bury his talent? Was it in faith? It seems that he's making his decisions based on fear. These 2 seem to be moving forward with a measure of faith that good things are going to happen.
And good things cannot happen unless you take action. If you could write the words up: to try, to risk, to attempt. So I teach classes in entrepreneurship, and the fundamental meaning of the word entrepreneurship means to risk, to try, to attempt. Now I want you to think about the plan of salvation that we all fought to come down here. We are now on this earth. God has preserved and protected our agency that we can try things and attempt living the gospel, and we take risks. Sometimes we make mistakes and we get hurt in the process of trying to be like Jesus. It is impossible to experience faith without risking something, without trying something, without attempting something.
Absolutely. Now, let's come to the day of reckoning. Not losing sight on the reason Jesus is telling this parable. It's not a story of just faith and fear and trying things and investing. This is a parable to help disciples of Jesus Christ, servants of the Lord, to better prepare for his second coming. Well, look at verse 19. After a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliveredst unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. Now, let's pause here for a minute. When this 5-talent guy comes in for his moment of reckoning with the Lord, it seems very clear in his mind and the way that Jesus is telling this story, it seems that this man is assuming that these are not the man's talents. They are the Lord's. These 10 talents. The Lord gave him 5, he's multiplied them, and he's not staking claim. He's not saying, okay, here are your 5 talents back. I'm going to keep these 5 because I did this work. I now earned them. I deserve them. The implication is he's delivering the 10 talents to his Lord. And I love this next verse. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Do you remember those words? Good and faithful servant. A wise and faithful servant. It ties in here from his question. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler. There's a difference between a servant and a ruler. You have proven yourself as a servant that is faithful and good. And we would add wise. And because you did that as a servant, I am now going to give you the necessary things in order to be a ruler, not a servant, over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. We find out from the very end of the parable that those 10 talents were not greedily taken by the Lord, saying, oh, good, look how much richer I am now. God doesn't take things from you in your discipleship. He gives things to you as you sacrifice in your discipleship. The man walks away with the 10 talents. I can picture being a time-traveling reporter going up to this man and saying, hey, I'm new here. What can you tell me? I'm doing an article on your master there. How would you describe him? What are some words you would use to describe the master? What do you think the 5-talent servant would say?
Mercy, love, generosity, kindness, goodness.
He would be, I can picture this man with a heart that is bursting with gratitude and love for the Lord. I think he would say, I would do anything he asked me to do. I did not deserve this. I didn't think that I was doing all of this for me. I was doing it for him, and now he's given it all back in abundance to me and made me a ruler over all these things when I'm not even worthy to be called his servant, but he's elevated me. Now, that was the first guy, and many people would say, well, of course that's what's going to happen, because look how privileged he was. I love the fact that in Matthew's account, he throws in this middle ground servant, the one with 2 talents. Let's look at his story. Verse 22, he also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliveredst unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. Same thing. Here they are. I've got 4 talents. Don't you love the fact that the next verse doesn't say, and the Lord said unto the servant, really? You've only got 4 talents? Well, the man before you, the other servant before you, he brought me 10 talents, and you've only got 4. I love the fact that God doesn't even mention anybody else. He's looking at this one man, and what does he say to the 2-talent guy? Well done, good and faithful servant. I need to pause right here, because if you look closely at verse 21 and 23, the entirety of the verse, the dialogue that comes back from the Lord to the 2 servants, is identical with the exception of one word. In verse 21, it added the word thou. But look carefully at the word thou in verse 21. It's italicized. And if you look at all of our Greek texts, all of the different versions of manuscript families of this story in Greek, you'll notice that there's no thou in the Greek text. The verse 21 and 23 are identical in the Greek. I'm not sure why the King James translators added the word thou, because this story is way more powerful if you just leave it the way it was in the Greek. It's identical. The 2-talent guy hears the exact same thing. And now he walks out. And if we were to interview him, I think we would hear identical adjectives to describe how he feels about the Lord as the 5-talent guy. But you'll notice that we've now come down to verse 23, the end of verse 23, which shifts us into the 3rd man. Verse 24, then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man. Let's pause right here for a minute. Let's reverse our little interview scenario. What if we were to pull aside the 1-talent guy as he's walking in, holding the roughly 75 pounds, give or take, who knows how much the actual weight of this money was as he's bringing it back to the Lord. If we were to interview him and say, tell me about your master. What kind of a person is he? What are some words that the 1 talent guy might say?
I knew thee, that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed.
What did you basically just say about the master?
He's grasping, selfish, and actually steals from other people.
You're taking things that you really don't deserve, that they're not yours, reaping where you haven't strawed. You're a harsh, hard man. You're scary. Look at verse 25. And I was afraid and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there, thou hast that is thine. Can you picture the body language? Can you picture the facial expressions as Jesus is telling this parable of what this man might look like if we were to make a movie of this? As he puts the talent down and he's cowering, he doesn't dare look at the Lord because the Lord is so mean and he's so harsh and hard. And now let's pause here for a minute. What if the 5 and the 2 talent guy are standing off to the side in the wings watching this? What would their reaction be as they hear this 1 talent man speaking to the Lord in this way? I can picture them looking at each other thinking, who is he talking about? This is so foreign. These words, they do not... Did you see what the Lord gave us? Did you see what he's done? And they would be shocked that this man was judging the Lord, the master, so harshly.
It actually makes me think about Lehi. So when Lehi leaves Jerusalem, he has 4 sons. 2 end up being faithful and righteous, and 2 not. Who do we blame? I'm not trying to actually assign blame, but you have 1 father and 2 outcomes. I sometimes actually see this as a teacher where I get students providing comments at the end of the semester. And literally, 1 comment will say, this was the best teacher I've ever experienced. And the very next comment will say, this is the worst teacher I've ever experienced. And I think, well, I think I'm still the same person. And this gets back to, this parable is partly about the qualities and characteristics of who God is, who our Lord is. It's also about who we are and who we're choosing to narrate who Jesus is. Are we willing to truly see Jesus as he is? Or are we going to create a false story and live in that false story and then create that outcome because we predicted it, we predetermined it because we chose to see things in a negative light?
It's amazing, that idea that Jesus teaches that with whatsoever judgment ye judge, therewith also shall ye be judged. It's that concept of judge righteously, lest ye be judged unrighteously. If you look at the way these first 2 judged the Lord, they judged him as a God of mercy and power and kindness. All of these wonderful, rewarding kinds of things. And what did they get? They found a master who fit how they judged him. How did this guy judge the Lord? Harsh, hard, angry. Well, what did he experience? Look at verse 26. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury, with interest, with increase. So now, he says in verse 28, Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And at that point, what's our 1 talent guy saying? He's saying, see, I told you he's mean, he's angry, he's vengeful. And the 5 and the 2 talent guy are saying, Oh, if only you knew the Lord the way we know him. Let's not lose focus here. This is a parable, number 2, about how to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. And it's about how to be a wise and good servant of the Lord. So now the question you might be able to wrestle with is, what are the symbolic applications for the talents that the Lord has given me? We're no longer talking about the 5, 2, and the 1 guy from 2,000 years ago in Jesus' story. We're now talking about you and me. What might those talents represent? For some, it could be money. For some, it could be the way we use the word talents, gifts, and abilities. For some, it could be children. For some, it could be intelligence and capacities to learn and to teach and to grow in our intellect. For others, it could be health. For others, it could be job opportunities. For others, it could be church callings. And for some of you, it could be a combination of all of that. The point is, to be a faithful and wise servant implies we have to give those things that God has given us in faith and sacrifice and serve and try to multiply those various talents that God has given us, so that when he comes again, we're not saying, oh, I kind of wasted my time on other pursuits rather than focusing on what I had received from thee. And at that point, if I haven't focused on those things are taken away from me and given to others. Versus the 5 and the 2 talent guy who have invested their whole life in faith to serve the Lord, to return to him that which he has given to them, only for them to find out that he really is more merciful, more gracious, and more loving and kind than even we thought possible.